I've come to speak to you before in a different capacity. The last time I think I spoke here, I was a police officer with Roanoke City Police Department to talk about active shooter and church safety. So I came to Roanoke for become a police officer. I was a police officer for 10 years. In that capacity, I did patrol. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So I was patrol, obviously starting out. Then I went to a specialized unit that focused on violence, drugs, and gangs. And then I went to be a community resource officer. So I got to work with a lot of communities, developing community policing strategies, working to reduce the fear of crime and actual crime in our community. A large focus of my efforts were here in the Northwest. This is near and dear to my heart, really where I met Terry. And I've been really privileged to be able to serve in that capacity as long as I did. I then went to crime prevention that focused a lot on prevention and education, going to the schools, working with youth. 9 years ago, we created a program called the League Youth Outdoor Basketball League. And essentially, in a response to the amount of gun violence and gang violence that we had in the Melrose area, so we started a youth basketball league, starting with the police department, the mayor's office 9 years ago, and I've had over 600 kids participating in the Melrose area through that. So I was very privileged to be part of that. Then I went to the city manager's office right after they promoted me to sergeant. So got a promotion, and I left. So I was in the city manager's office as a neighborhood services coordinator and community engagement, working with the community to help facilitate change and quality of life issues in our neighborhoods at the city manager's office. And then recently, last year, I took a job. I tell everybody I'm trying to take the bingo card for like every level of government. So I just keep hopping around. I usually try to get ahead of the jokes. So I'm now at the schools in central office, so I'm able to go to different schools from elementary to Noel C. Taylor, our alternative behavioral school, and work with youth, work on best practices, work on our social emotional learning. I still do a lot of community-based things. That's why I'm here. I apologize for the shorts. I actually just got back from a sports camp that we're doing for middle schoolers. So if you're interested in signing your kid up, we'll be having sports camp all throughout the summer for middle schoolers and rising ninth graders as well. So Terry reached out to me to talk a little bit about the gang violence and gang awareness. I did this for about 6 years, the intel side of it, interviewing, home visits, did numerous amount of interviews with gang members, individuals that have experienced violence from gangs. So they invited me here, and then I, in turn, invited someone that can really speak to the truth of that, and that's Brandy and Reynolds. And so their sister and son were killed here in Roanoke. So I brought them to share their story in hopes that things that they can share with you, maybe you can help with a family member or a loved one or a grandchild that may be experiencing this, and hopefully prevent something like from what they've experienced happening in your life. So they're going to have an incredible story. I think I have about 40 minutes, 30 minutes. So you guys are probably going to hear more about them than you want to hear about me, because they have a pretty incredible story. So I'm really interested in that. So I'm going to go over a brief slideshow. I know most of you guys can't see it, but I'm just going to kind of talk to you through it as we go through it. So this essentially keeps me on track, so I don't just talk to you guys. It keeps me honest. Okay, so we can go to the next one. So what is a gang? So there is an actual code section. It's not illegal to be in a gang, but the code section is essentially 3 or more people, some kind of identifying marker, whether that be clothing, whether that be hand signs, whether that be tattoos, whether that be name, and essentially you have to have predicate act. So there has to be some kind of criminal element to it. Now again, it's not illegal to be in a gang, and from my experience, we have not persecuted any kind of gang involvement here in the city of Roanoke on a state level. So as far from the police department perspective, you're very challenged on how to address actually gang violence and the things that stem from gangs, right? And so you often hear about federal cases, you'll hear about RICO cases, essentially, where it's organized crime that's facilitated by a gang. So it's very limited on how you actually combat this in a criminal sense. And so what the interesting part, obviously being a police officer living through George Floyd, there is a real reckoning on how we deal with substance abuse, how we deal with violence, right? How we deal with poverty and mental health. Obviously, we saw the impacts of what in the 1970s, where we eliminated state asylums, where we had a large increase of individuals with mental health issues, but didn't have the infrastructure to deal with that, right? So what does that usually look like? It looks like homelessness, right? It looks like substance abuse, and it's criminalized, right? And so a lot of the violence that we're seeing while it's typically been handled through the criminal justice system, many of these things should be handled more in a holistic point of view, right? There are many things that lead to this, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, whether it's spiritual, right? The things that some of these people are lacking. And so there has been a real reckoning on how to actually address these things. If you guys have kept up with the news, or you've seen the Gun Violence Commission and some of their efforts, right? Almost none of them actually involve any kind of recommendation for criminal intervention. Because we know many of these underlying issues, you know, usually the hammer has been the answer, right? Or we need to maybe look at different tools. So that's a long-winded first slide. I told y'all, take the mic away from me. All right, we can go, keep going. So there's some of the predicate acts. So gang profile. So this was 11 years ago, but you can go all the way to the end there. It's all the effects. But the gang profile showed that the recruitment age is 11 to 14 years old. So this was 12 years ago that the National Gang Center did that. You know nowadays that level is even lower, right? Because of what? A lot of our kids have access to individuals that may have never ever been exposed to these type of people, right? Whether it be social media, whether that be actually targeted kind of recruitment through messaging, those kind of things. WhatsApp, obviously, Snapchat are huge, TikTok, those kind of things, where you can personally send messages targeting individuals that may be vulnerable for something like this. And we saw this in the response to the League of Dr. Basketball League. Was a 30-year-old male that was recruiting juveniles to sell drugs and carry firearms for them, right? And so these people know they can target youth. Criminal justice system is technically lenient on these people. These are young kids that are looking for belonging, looking for security, looking for just attention, and looking for money, right? And so they know this is the profile, our young people. So why do people join a gang? Obviously the hierarchy of needs is a big part of this, right? The physiological. This is the basic elements to survival, right? We know that housing is a major issue in Roanoke. With Roanoke, when I left the city manager's office, we're sitting about 45 vouchers for Section 8 housing. That's 45 families without secured housing, which is a huge component of instability in a family, right? We know that there's legislation that's talking about getting rid of some of our social welfare programs. Those all affect kind of that need just to basically survive. That is, many of our families that find they're in a current situation that just having to survive. Many kids helping parents paying bills, right? We understand that. So there's the safety component. So they did a gang survey, which we'll look a little bit earlier. They did it about 2 years ago. And this was almost number one, the feeling of safety, right? And I always used to say it like it's the chicken and the egg, right? Where it's like, well, I got a gun because he's got a gun. And then you talk to the other young man, well, I got a gun because he's got a gun. It's just like, all right, where did this start, right? It's this feeling of safety that's, sometimes it's the reality. Some of our kids are faced with real violence in our streets and in our schools. But some of it is perceived, right? Kind of that arms race, right? If I attack first, I can no longer be the victim in this situation. I love and belonging, right? So we did an intervention probably like 5-6 years ago when I was really getting heavy into the drug violence and gang violence stuff. And we visited a mother who was needing help with her 15-year-old son. Did a home visit. He wasn't there. We're like, where's he at? We need to talk to him. We need to figure out what's the road here. What's some pathways that we can create for this young man? And she told me, well, he's in Greensboro with a bunch of adults down there clubbing. So you tell me, as a 15-year-old, who's going to say no to that? Hopefully all 15-year-olds are saying, yeah, I'm going to say no to that, right? That temptation. But that is a reality. That is those pulling factors that some of our kids are into, right? And that is a very, very strong pull. And if you cannot get ahead of that, it is going to be very hard to pull that out, because with substance abuse and working on a substance abuse program, many changes don't happen until this first consequence come, right? This is all fun, right? You're going to say it's dangerous. No, it's fun. Nothing's happened. Nothing's bad happened to me, right? We feel invincible, especially as young people. I used to feel that way. And so that older person that's giving you love, that sense of belonging, that's huge. Huge. Self-esteem is obviously a big part of it too, right? It's kind of, you want to be the alpha dog, you want to be the macho man, you don't want to be looked down upon, right? And we know with bullying, right, that is widespread. It's no longer what I say is like kind of the odd man out, right? It can come from many different directions, especially with social media. So we really have to protect our kids. My wife showed me kind of Instagram, as we talk about social media, me talking about how you wouldn't let your kid with home alone with a box of matches, then why are you leaving them home alone with a cell phone, right? At 10 years old, with unfettered access to internet, social media, every single thing that they can get into, and that can cause just as much harm, just as much damage to the family, to their psyche, to their self-esteem, right? So as parents, we need to have a real reckoning of, what are we allowing, right? We want to give them more responsibility. We want to give them access to cell phones for safety, right? For them to call us if there's an issue, or to catch up, or transportation, right? But we need to be really careful about what they're doing on their social media website, right? Because they're going to be looking for love. They're going to be looking to reach out to people, and people in turn are going to be looking for them. Sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's not. So we talked a little bit about the pushes and pulls, right? Some of the pulls are the money, girls, boys, attention, right? Some of the pushes are kind of what we typically think about, right? The socioeconomic status, right? The current environment they live in, whether there's a family member in a gang, right, that's currently involved in those things, whether those are things that actually are kind of talked about in the family, right? Some families have never discussed it, and some families are okay with it. We've seen it both wholehearted, right, where it's the family showing up with gang attire to support meeting with their student, right? Hey, your third grader's talking about joining a gang, and here comes father walking in with gang-affiliated clothing. That's a hard conversation to have, right? So what are we doing as parents? That is a real challenge that we have in the school system. You can ask. So this is that gang. You can look this up. It's the Roanoke Youth and Gang Violence Community Assessment. It's a ton of information. It's really good. One of the big primary motivations they talked about is for youth. This was about 600 people that were interviewed. It was protection, social bonding, money, and entertainment, right? Just having fun, right? We all hear it. There's not enough stuff going on in Roanoke. Kids have been saying it for years, right? There's never anything going on in Roanoke. We need a Dave & Buster's, right? So those are some of the things. You want to go next? So you can't see that, but that's a pretty interesting slide. So many of the so when you look at this survey, obviously when you look at a survey, you need to make sure who they're polling. Majority of the youth that filled in the survey are not currently participating in a gang. So you kind of have to take that with a little grain of salt. But I think for this is eye-opening because essentially you'll go cross-eyed if you try to look at it too hard. Essentially what that graph says, it says what are negative impacts of a gang? And a large majority of those kids said there are no negative impacts, only positive benefits to street gangs in Roanoke. And these are individuals that do not identify as being currently in a gang. A large majority of the individuals that fill this out do not identify as being in a gang. That's a real issue, right? They see only positive things of being involved in street gang. Protection, love, you get fast money. That's a real issue. If that's the perception that we have, and in the reality, we know the reality of the harms that gangs cause, right? Yeah. We absolutely understand that reality. So that's a shocking statistic that I see and that I always try to draw attention of. Is like, as a community, are we condemning these things? Are we stepping up? Are we putting our face forward to go, no, these are things that we don't stand for in this community? And then one of the things they said, the number one reason for joining, 1 for money, 2 for fun, 3 for protection. You go next. This one talks about what would take them out of a gang. It's not recreational sports. A lot of it is if they end up having a baby early or if they get a job. One of the other big indicators of whether they join or not going to join a gang is if someone in their family member tells them not to. Right? That's our job. That's our responsibility, right? Is to kind of put that out there, to make your values and your standards known to your children, to your grandchildren, their expectations, right? Because we always hear, we need more jobs, we need more jobs. Many of us cannot create jobs, right? Or do we even create the right kind of jobs? Many of these things are out of our hands. What we can do is make sure that we are sharing that these are not acceptable things. Some of the risk factors, obviously, of being a gang: 1, community; 2, family, school, peer group. And the last, which is interesting, is what we probably many of us, the misperception of what a gang member is individual attributes, right? So that person, who that person is, you know, their character, you know, their upbringing, or their character, we usually think, or at least for me, my perception is always like, what? You know, that's just that kind of kid, right? Not being educated about that. Really, the number one indicator is usually community. And the issue with that is that these kids' communities are getting even bigger, right? With social media. You don't have to be in Richmond to be talking to a guy in Richmond about, hey, how do you get money? How do you get girls? How do you get cars? What I should be doing, right? Have we seen a huge increase in active shooter situations, right? People using violence in our schools and our communities. This is a large indicator of why that is. Because back in the day, you know, if you didn't have somebody in your immediate family, in your immediate community, right, that identified in this way or that was pushing you to do these kind of negative things, you really didn't have much of that pressure. Nowadays, it is widespread, right? Back to, are we making sure we're watching what our kids are doing on social media, on their cell phones, electronics? What they're watching on YouTube. Okay, so obviously this is a pretty funny one, behaviors. Essentially this is just signs of being a teenager, right? Withdrawn, moody, not wanting to engage in activities. With things to keep in mind, right? And so I always get a laugh usually as parents when I say these type of things. They're like, oh, this is my 13-year-old son. Yeah, this is my 14-year-old daughter. Like, yeah. But this is a reality of many of these things of what they start looking like. They become withdrawn. They begin to push back on authority. Those are things to just keep in mind as your children grow up. Some of the lack of life skills that many of them have. So I'll give you an interesting story. So we stopped a young man that was driving around after hours. Get everybody out of the car. This was a brother of the individual that was causing a lot of the gang violence here in Melrose. And it was a backseat passenger that we were interviewing. And we were just talking, known this guy for a long time. And I don't know how we got into the subject. We were just talking about like what he's doing, what's his plan is. He was in community college. He dropped out. And the interesting thing he shared with me is he said, I used to go by Johnson, or bald guy. And so he said, Johnson, at 14 years old, I got caught stealing a moped. I went to Corner Springs for 2 years. I never learned fraction. I never learned math. I never graduated. What am I supposed to do? And you could kind of see the absolute, just kind of crushing little soul of this young man going, he feels absolutely helpless, right? He made one mistake that put him in a hole, did not create, maybe people did create pathways for him, maybe he didn't take advantage of those pathways, but felt that there was no pathway out in the direction he was going and was trapped. Right? And you saw that with the activities and the people that he hung out with, and it became part of him, right? It was, I'm irredeemable, you know, there's no fixing me, and that's what it is. And so we talk about lack of life skills. Some of those are self-esteem, some are goal setting. The big thing that we see a lot of our violence is conflict resolution, right? Somebody disrespects me, right? Somebody's talking about me. Somebody's talking about my dead uncle. Like, you never even met my dead uncle, right? I didn't even meet my dead uncle, right? And so that ability to deal with conflict is causing a lot of these situations that typically should not get out of hand to be getting out of hand. And where are those interventions, right? Where are those people that can intervene and stop that before it becomes real violence that we have in our street? You know, 7, 8 years ago, we had a gentleman, an officer that came over from Norfolk. And, you know, he came over, he goes, man, the gun violence is terrible, the gang violence is terrible. We're at 14-year-olds engaging in this kind of thing. And 8 years ago, I was going, not here in Roanoke. No, we're good, man. It's 20-year-olds, it's 24-year-olds. It's not going to happen here. And what do we see now? 8 years later, it has creeped west. Right? Much similar to gang activity that creeps north to south, from New York down south. We're seeing that violence here. 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds that are being murdered. Next. How am I doing on time? Someone can kick me out. Terry, you gonna kick me out if I steal time away from Brady? So some of the gang trends that we see, some of it is geographical. That can go away, right? So our historic gangs, our Villa Heights, our 17th Street, our 8th Street guys, our Melrose Bloods, our Lincoln Terrace posse, those are like historical gangs that are generally focused around geographical, y'all looking at me like, I heard this. Geographical locations, but now it's not the case, right? We've had a young man that identified as an 8th Street blood that lived in Hickory Woods, about as far east as you can get, right? Would not interact with any of these kids unless it was inside of a school setting. So we understand those lines are being blurred, but many of them are social media issues, social media beefs. Some of it's comments or threats that somebody heard, that somebody said that they heard back. Some of the things that we used to see is obviously an escalation in crime. So you'll typically see this in gangs. It starts with petty things like car hopping, breaking into cars, to splat ball guns. Anybody heard splat ball guns? They roll around almost like paintball guns. Look at my man right there. Yeah, you got one? Yep. So you'll see those as like mock kind of drive-bys where they're simulating it, and then it eventually escalates to what you see as real violence, right? So you see usually a gradual escalation in violence. Go ahead. So some of the warning signs, amidst the hanging out with gangs, right? Do we talk to our kids? What does that mean to you when they say a number? Or hey, I hang out with this crew. I hang out with that. What does that mean to you? What do they do? Who are those kids? Do I know their mom? Do I know their dad? Right? Where are y'all hanging out at? Was there a reason for you to be over there? Right? Those kind of things. Unusual hand signs, communication, secretive on their social media devices. Not telling you who they're communicating with. Unexplained cash or goods, clothing, all things that are obviously concerning, things that you need to be aware of. You go next. So that's behavior. So one of the things we talk about in school in our social emotional learning is talking about behavior is functional, right? And so we don't talk about like what's wrong with you, right? A kid that's acting out or in crisis is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, right? Those are typically things that are happening. Whether it could be abuse, it could be neglect, it could be just simple malnutrition. Right? We all know how we act when we get hungry, right? But there are usually some underlying issues that are going on that cause behaviors. It can be, obviously like ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, where it's actually a diagnosis, right? Some kind of actual mental health diagnosis. It could just be general avoidance behavior, and they know, and they act out. They either, one, don't get the consequences, or two, they get the attention, right? I had a young lady that I've been working with for a long time. She acts out because she wants the attention, right? So like on a good day, everybody's good, all right, just move on her way, and then she'll come busting in the door, carrying on, so then everybody comes and shows her attention, right? One time, we're like, all right, today's the day. We're not gonna cater to it. She's got to go do a test. We're gonna lock her out. She's got to stay in a room, and she was trying to kick the door in because she wanted to come see us. And it's like, those are some of the kind of certain behaviors, right, where you can see it. They may be acting out for attention. They may be acting out to avoid situations. I went on a tangent, but I just think that was an interesting story. Yeah. All right, go ahead. Another behaviors, obviously, withdrawing from school, decline in school attendance, exhibiting signs of any kind of usage, breaking rules constantly. Keep going. So in the future, what do we do? How do we stop preventing gangs? Do we arrest them? No, obviously we show that time incarceration can actually make things worse, right? They almost always put people in a worse situation than when they came out. I think Sheriff Hatch is doing an incredible job with the things that he's doing to invest in the residents at his correctional centers, right? Whether that's job training, whether that's counseling, whether that's just kind of learning and building that human back. And so when they go in, they should come out in a better situation than when they left. I think that's a huge investment. I think it is going to pay dividends. I cannot say enough about what Sheriff Hatch is doing. So obviously ignoring the situation doesn't get any better, right? Years, if you've been here in Roanoke, we didn't have gangs. We don't talk about it. We don't have these issues. This is, not a big town. It's not going to make things any better, no doubt. Go ahead. So what do we do as parents? Right? We be a positive role model. We set the right example. We express what our values are, what our standards are. We hold high expectations. We create pathways for our kids. Right? Oh, you don't want to go to the summer camp? Well, too bad. We signed you up, right? And drop you off here at the door. I'll see you in 3 hours. A few young men this morning, right, were like, I don't want to be here. So like, well, you're here, right? It's like, you don't have to say it, right? Because your mom feeds you. So that's where we are right now. Some things too, just talk to your kids, right? Ask questions, right? Ask open-ended questions. Ask how they're feeling, how their experiences have been. It has been shocking when I talk to kids about their experiences in their schools in just a short amount of time and how much they can open up, right? That young man that didn't want to be playing lacrosse this morning right? I was asking, hey, how did 5th grade go? It was good, it was fine. How did 6th grade? I don't know. Well, what do you mean you don't know? Well, it's a new school. So what does that mean? Do you have new friends that have gone there? I don't know. How does that make you feel? I'm really nervous, right? I'm really nervous, right? And that is just a little bit of open-ended, prodding questions go, how does it make you feel? And so if that 6th grader doesn't find a community, right, continues to have low self-esteem, doesn't find friends, one of the biggest things he kept saying is like, I want friends, I want friends. If he doesn't find that community, what does that end up going to look like? It's going to turn into some behavior issues, right? We talked about behavior being a function of it. We're working on some things for 6th and 9th grade. That transition is huge. You need, if you have a 9th grader, if you have a 6th grader, really kind of explore getting them connected to that school, finding pathways, getting them involved, making them feel belong, because many of those kids struggle through that transition. Our 9th graders are disciplined 5 times more than the seniors. 5 times more than the seniors, right? Because many of those reasons is they do not find that sense of belonging. And they start to slide, and what it slides and looks like is humiliation in the classroom. They get called out, right? And so that turns into behavior. That turns into skipping, that turns out to acting out, it turns into fights, whatever they do to avoid those situations, right? They don't want to look stupid, or they don't want to look weak, or they don't want to look like they're behind their classmates, because all the way up to middle school, they get dragged up. We typically don't hold people back until high school, and when those consequences come, many kids don't handle that very well. It's like, oh, you're moving up to 10th grade, but you got to take 9th grade English again, and 10th grade English. You got to take 9th grade government and 10th grade government on Play-Doh, and that is a very deep hole that many of our kids find themselves spinning and spinning in circles. Their wheels, right? And it turns into behaviors. So go ahead. I promise I'm almost off. Talk about the dangers and consequences of being in the game, right? We talked about many of the kids don't even see there's any negative consequences of being in the game. Okay. The future, prevention, education, right? Start talking to your kids, teaching them social skills, getting them involved in things, creating pathways for them, having them involved in things like this. Here we go. Look at y'all. Good job. Rehabilitation. This is talking about wannabe gang members. That's what Sheriff Hash is doing, right? Working with individuals that have been incarcerated, that are returning citizens, building them up, putting them in better situations in the game. Okay, those are my references. So, I knew I took a long time. Denise, how much time do I have? Oh, like 10 minutes? I'm going to give Brandy and Daryl their time, because nobody wants to hear me keep talking. What do you say? 10, 15 minutes. Can you guys hold in there? I think this is going to be a really interesting story. So I appreciate y'all's time and listening to me. I'm going to just kind of sit back and listen to Brandy share her story as well. So thank you all for coming.
Hey guys, thanks for having me this afternoon. I'm going to set my water over here. I'm a little nervous and I get a little emotional every time I tell this story. So I just ask that you show me a little grace this afternoon. But thanks for having me, and thanks for listening to my story today. I moved to Roanoke in 1998 and was here with my husband for 15 years, just the two of us, before my parents moved here and retired. While I was here, my parents got empty nest syndrome, and they became foster parents. And a little fella entered their life in 1999. His name is Nicholas Lee. And you may have seen our story in the newspaper or on the TV in the last 6 years. But he was shot and murdered here in Roanoke on June 15th, 2017. My parents moved here to get out of some gang situations that they weren't comfortable with in South Carolina. And I begged them, come here. We can bike, we can hike, we can fish, we can hunt, we can be a family. My dad was in the Navy my whole life, so I always wanted him to be home, and he was retired when Nicholas was growing up, so Nicholas always wanted him to get a job. You kind of always want what you don't have, I guess. So they moved here the year before Nicholas started high school. He went to Patrick Henry High School as a freshman. While he was at Patrick Henry High School, he was recruited into the Rollin' 30s gang. He had seen a gun at school one day and went home, told mom and dad. Mom and dad said, well, you've got to do the right thing. If you see something, you have to say something. So we went back to the school, and he said something. They assured my parents that they would keep his name anonymous, and that did not happen. By the end of the day, he'd been labeled a snitch. So he now needed protection. He now needed someone to help him maneuver through the school system. So he was the right target to be recruited into the gang. He was naive enough to think that you could be beat in, beat out, and go on about your business. But that's not the case. He did get beat in, and he joined the gang, and he did some things that he joined the gang. So, you know, we say that as part of our story, but we also know that he was recruited and needed something that he didn't feel we could give him at home. So once he joined the gang, you know, his behavior changed, his roller skates came up missing, his grades dipped. You know, there were definitely some things that my folks didn't like, and they held him to the same standard that they held me to. So he knew the consequences at home, there were rules at home. When the truancy officer came, you know, he had to face those consequences. He spent some time in Pointer Springs. And eventually it was time to graduate high school. And he was ready to graduate, and told mom and dad, it's gonna be okay. I'm gonna graduate, and I'm gonna turn 18, and I'm gonna get my life together, and I'm gonna leave all this behind me. So on June 14th, well, the week before that, he had, well, let's back up a little bit. Right before graduation, he was beat out. That particular fight was live streamed between Patrick Henry High School and William Fleming.
Wow.
When I watch that fight, it brings me to my knees because he kept his hands over his head the entire time. And I thought, why didn't you fight back? Come on, boy, you know how to take a punch. Why didn't you fight back? The rule is you don't fight back. You take the beating. And that's all you get. So everyone watched that fight. Everyone watched him get beat out. He thought it was the end. He was naive enough to think that he could make music over with the Bloods. He was a Crip. He thought he could make music, and that's all he was doing was making music. And he was making music where he shouldn't have been. The person he was making music with said, if you don't stop, they're going to blue light you. And that's exactly what they did. I feel myself getting shaky as I tell these details because they're personal and they're hard, and nothing I say brings him back to us. So on Wednesday, June 14th, he had been beat out at this point, and he was invited to a barbecue. And the leader of the gang, there's a picture of them, his arm around him, and he says, Mom, don't worry, Big Homie won't hurt me. Big Homie would never hurt me. Big Homie is now serving 37 years in jail. So that night, Nicholas was given a proposition to get back into the good graces of the gang. He was told and given a gun, you kill, and we'll let you back in. So they took him to the trap house, and they kept him for hours, and they berated him, and his girlfriend was there. She was able to leave. They kept him for hours. There was about 15 to 1, and he had no way out except he was given a gun and placed in the front seat of a car. So you have the driver of the car, who was a shooter, Nicholas in the front seat of the car, and a young man in the back seat who his life was in complete danger as Nicholas was tasked to kill him. In the car behind them was another shooter and the getaway driver. They drove around for a couple hours with the ruse that they were just looking for girls. They were going to go to a party and they were going to pick up girls and they're just going to have a good time. Nicholas kind of got an idea of what was going on, and he gave the boy in the back seat, when we get out, you gotta run. They got over to the apartment complex where they decided they were going to execute Nicholas. And as soon as they got out of the car, Nicholas looked at that boy and that boy took off running. And that boy is still alive today, and I'm thankful for that. He is struggling. He has been in and out of jail since, and he needs lots of prayer and support, and I hope that he gets it. So he ran, and he ducked behind a camper, and he stood there and watched what was getting ready to happen. Nicholas refused to pull the trigger, and they took the gun from him, and as he ran, he was shot 3 times. He continued to run, and he ran, for the longest time I thought he just ran from here to the back door, but I now know I've seen an aerial picture of the apartment complex, and he ran a long, long way. He ran past the playground, through the courtyard. He knocked on a window. He kept running, and he eventually collapsed beside a dumpster where the 2 shooters caught up to him and shot him again in the back. He was then transported to the hospital. The EMTs did every life-saving measure that they possibly could have done. There was nothing that they could have done else. So trauma on top of trauma of what he experienced. He died in the hospital. After that, the police knocked on my parents' door and said, "Your son's been shot and he didn't make it." We didn't really know who, what. We didn't get a lot of details for several days. In the meantime, one of the shooters showed up. Nicholas's friends held a candlelight vigil near the high school. One of the shooters showed up there the night of the vigil. That to me is just a whole different level of a lack of remorse, to show up where kids are grieving. They were all in blue, and they were all grieving, and they're all children. So now, it's been 6 years. June 15th, we acknowledge that day as a day of great loss for our family. But the month of June, Nicholas was born, graduated, adopted, and died all of the month of June, all of just in a few weeks. He was 1 week shy of his 18th birthday, from Thursday to Thursday, 1 week shy of turning 18. In the moment, he was tasked with kill or be killed. A 17-year-old boy decided that life was more important, and he did not pull that trigger. And we live with that, and we live with that loss. We have been at every single court hearing. COVID was in the mix of this, so we had to do a lot of this by Zoom, closed court cases. But we were at every single court case, every single time. And we have had to go and face them and give our victim impact statements in court. We had to deliver those twice. We had to walk through the little wall and stand in the presence of them. In their statements, the leader of the gang said, "I love Nicholas." I struggle with that, because that's not what love looks like to me. That's not what love looks like. In the midst of the forgiveness that's had to come, I cannot live a life full of anger. I cannot do that. Nicholas would not want that for me. He would not want that for my family. Nicholas was the light of our lives. His room lit up. His smile lit up the room. He was the baby. He's the baby. We're 24 years difference in age, so I never lived in the same household with him. But I got to watch my parents be parents. So I got to relive a childhood with him full of magic and traveling and joy, just pure joy. So on the other side of that love is this great loss that I don't know what to do with. I don't know where to put it. And in the midst of forgiveness, the 4 defendants, the 4 bad guys, as my son calls them, they leave 11 children behind. 11 children still here in our community. 11 children with no father in their home that are left to make choices. Is anyone reaching out to help them, making sure they have the resources that they need so that they don't follow in the same path? The leader of the gang, Sean Durant, when he was 16, he was involved and he stomped someone to death. He went to prison. He was sentenced to state prison for 30 years. He served 9, or whatever the numbers are. He served 9. When he got out of jail is when he started the Rolling 30s and recruited not only my brother, but lots of young men and women. With as many shootings as there's been, we've heard at the press conference that they'll prosecute every gun that's, This did have to go to a federal case. This was not prosecuted on the state level. All 4 of them now are serving federal sentence. There's an average of 37 years that they'll be facing. If Nicholas had pulled the trigger, we would still have been in court every single day. My mom would have hit him in the back of the head every time she saw him, but we would have still been sitting there. That love doesn't go away, and it bothers me that no one showed up for them except for the very last day of sentencing. So there's a lot to unpack as we go through it and wonder why. Why did you think it was okay to just shoot and kill a boy in the street? We are a city that loves to hike, that loves to bike, that loves to eat, that loves art murals, but we are also a city with the gang problem, and I don't feel that it's being addressed as properly as it should have been. My parents went multiple times to the school. They've met multiple times with the police chief at the time. And each time they were told, it's just kids being kids, it's just 9th Street versus 13th Street, it's 8th Street versus Lansdowne, it's this versus that. And it wasn't. And it wasn't. So I just want to share with you just the love and the loss and the forgiveness that we've been through and that we continue to go through. We don't know where we fit in on the other side of the court case. We're not sure if, my dad and I have had some really deep conversations. I've always believed in hope and change is possible. So I've got to keep hoping. And the only thing that I know to do is to tell my story. I don't have the answer to the gang violence. I don't have the answer to all the other violence. I don't have the answer. But I do know that it is permanent and fatal, and that our kids I feel like we're under siege, and we've got to pull together as a community to stop this. I've got a son that's now in the 7th grade. He was at lacrosse camp today. I have to decide in 2 years, do I send him to the same high school in which my brother was recruited? Or don't I? It's a great school. The year my brother graduated, they had $2 million in scholarships. That's some smart kids. That's a lot of future looking at us. We owe it to them to make sure that we are doing the right thing to help them. And again, I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that I can just share my story of love and loss.
It is our hope, friend, that all that is said, thank you for sharing. And thank you for opening up. We just pray that, that our feelings and our love is with you. Thank you so much for coming. Joshua, come forward, please. When I asked my sister, you all have been working here in the city of Richmond Roanoke for a long time, and she said, I know just the person for you. And she really did. We thank you for all of you. valuable information. We wanted our teams to come so they could hear, they could be in the midst. And we just thank you for just being here for us. And we know the problem. I'm from the city of Richmond, and we have our many gangs and sets of issues there. And we have to continue to pray and continue to work together to try to see an end to this.
All right. We want you. Oh, there's one. Come on in. I hear you there. We would like to present to you Joshua Johnson from the Portsmouth Richmond Roanoke District Sunday School Convention 2023, charged up with the power of Jesus, a certificate of appreciation to Joshua A. Johnson from the Sunday School Convention Workshop Facilitator in appreciation for your participation June the 30th, 2023 to July the 1st, 2023. We want to thank you for coming and giving us that relevant information. All the time. I see him at every event.
Ms. Francie and Mr. Lee. We just can't thank you enough so much. Token to remember us, but I know that we will remember you. Thank you so very much. Yes. So, now we will, it's just about time. Oh, yes, I forgot their gift bags. Here they are. Make sure you remember Mount Zion and the Portsmouth Richmond Roanoke District. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much.